Hello, welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson, and I'm joining you from Galivants Ferry. It's a small Ori community on the banks of the Little PD River, where for 143 years, Democratic candidates have been coming here to stump, eat chicken bog, and listen to some bluegrass.
History about the stump is that my great-grandfather was the first that owned the old country store here, that we had our first stump here. And then after my great-grandfather, my grandfather, then my father, and then me, I'm the fourth generation. We've got the fifth generation that's learning and stepping in now, doing a lot of the media, and we've got the sixth ones in training. So I'm the fourth generation, because this is something that people don't get by just watching TV. It's eyeball to eyeball politics. You know, somebody can go up to somebody in the crowd and say, hey, you know, I've been worried about blankety blank. And they can look you in the eye and find out, you know, did they dart their eyes or how genuine did they feel? My fondest memory was always Fritz Hollins. I was a little child, don't remember, but I was a child, but in 1954, he announced his first statewide run for lieutenant governor right here on the steps of the PD Farm store. I mean, so, and then in 2004, we celebrated 50 years of stumping with him. So my memories over the years was that voice of Fritz Hollins, which was unmistakable, welcoming the crowd and telling them how important this event was.
And it is a sense of nostalgia and a sense of community spirit and working together that has made South Carolina great. I had that feeling just last week in returning from Normandy, where we visited the Anzio and Normandy beachheads. I remembered the greatest of all great South Carolinians, John C. Calhoun, who said that those who would enjoy the blessings of liberty have got to be willing to undergo the hardships of sustaining it. And we saw many, many who gave the supreme, ultimate hardship, suffered that ultimate hardship of sustaining your freedom and mine so that we could meet in public here and campaign each other and talk to the voters and see them eye to eye and really work as politics is meant to be.
Well, I've always been interested in the stump since I've been in South Carolina. I just never had the opportunity. I was either working or whatever, and so this was the one that I definitely knew I wanted to come to, and I'm not disappointed.
With the 2020 primary approaching in February, the Galivants Ferry Stump had a different role this year. It actually had Democratic presidential candidates giving their stump speech for the first time in its 140-year history. Now we caught up with some of these candidates and also heard from them from the stump. And I'm joined with Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York. Mayor, thanks for making time.
My pleasure, Gavin.
So you've been bounced around the state so far. You kind of came back in town. We haven't seen you for a while, a couple months since the Democratic weekend, the big state convention, some other events. I'm wondering how you see South Carolina as part of your overall strategy for 2020 and where it fits in for you.
I've always felt South Carolina is a key. I mean, South Carolina as a state, to me, is wide open right now in terms of my ability as a candidate to reach people with a message that I think resonates here. I'm talking about working people and what they need nowadays, and the fact that our government in Washington is not representing working people. I'm talking about the kinds of things I've done in New York that really matter to working people, like pre-K for every child for free, like higher minimum wage, making sure people have access to health care. And I talk about this all over South Carolina. Every place I go, it doesn't matter if you're in Charleston or Columbia, or today I was in Andrews, the response is the same. People like the idea of putting working people first, and they like to know that someone can prove they know how to do it. because I've been doing it in the nation's largest city. So we're going to be putting some real focus here.
One of your new policy initiatives is talking about that robot tax.
Yes.
I'm guessing that's the way you want to try and get people back to work. How is that playing, and what are your thoughts on the importance of something like that to help stymie?
I'll tell you, I was this morning at the port of Charleston, where automation has threatened the jobs of hundreds and hundreds of port workers. We're seeing this all over the country. We've seen it obviously in the automobile industry. We've seen it with trucking. Now I'm very heartened to say the port workers here, the longshoremen in Charleston, defended their rights and protected their jobs. But not just millions, Gavin, tens of millions of jobs are threatened all over this country by automation. There's no federal strategy to deal with it. So I proposed a couple of things, stopping the tax breaks. There are federal tax breaks right now for companies that automate jobs and put American workers out of work. That makes no sense. And we should actually require that when a company automates and a worker's not going to have a livelihood anymore for their family, that there be a robot tax. This is an idea that Bill Gates actually originated. And it's pretty straightforward. It says we are going to need resources to retrain and re-employ American workers who lose their jobs because of automation. There's got to be a source of that money. Those companies that are now unfortunately choosing to save money, putting their bottom line ahead of working people, well, they bear some responsibility here. And another thing, Gavin, that's very striking, it's common sense, but it's striking. A robot, a machine, does not pay income tax. So you go ahead 10 years, 20 years in the future, we have a lot fewer workers potentially if we don't do something. We're also going to have a lot less revenue to take care of everything we need in our society.
But if you're taxing certain companies like advanced manufacturers, people like, there's so many of them in South Carolina, are you worried that that could lead to offshoring of these jobs then, if they're going to have to pay another fee? Or
first of all, it should be done all over the country. So this should be a national strategy. Like I said, there is no national strategy to deal with automation. It's one of the biggest issues affecting Americans and particularly working people in America, and yet it's very rarely talked about. I give Andrew Yang credit. He's talked about that his solution to me is the wrong solution. It's have the government send a check, universal basic income, have the government send a check once a month, and you don't have a career, you don't have a livelihood, you don't have a future. I believe in work. I believe in a future based on work. To do that, we're going to have to demand these companies pay their fair share so we can reemploy American workers. But no, I don't think it's going to create a disadvantage because in the end, America is still the greatest market in the world, the greatest innovator in the world. So long as there's a national policy and you don't pit one state against another, I actually think it's going to help us because millions of people will be re-employed, have a livelihood, be contributing, be paying those income taxes, and a much better chance of having a country that people feel actually belongs to them, not a country that left them by the side of the road.
And I know we only have a few moments, but I want to try and cover a little bit of everything. One of the defining moments of your campaign you mentioned was having this discussion with your son who's biracial about police brutality. How do we get to a point as a nation that you don't have to have that conversation, other parents don't have to have that conversation with their children?
Gavin, I tell you, it is very moving when you have to have that conversation. It's sad, it's contradictory to have to tell a good young man you have to be careful out there. But I do aspire to the day when my son will not have to have that conversation with his kids. And I say it's retraining our police in de-escalation, it's implicit bias training, it's body cameras, it's things we're doing right now in New York and some other places in the country that actually work, that create a dynamic where we don't ever have to have another one of these tragedies.
But I mean, do you see that across the country? Not only, obviously you're talking about things that happen in New York as well, but like in South Carolina, I mean, are you hearing from people that they're worried about that, having to have that conversation with their children?
Unquestionably. All over South Carolina, all over the country, I hear from parents who worry all the time. Well, if you're a parent, you care most about the safety of your child. Parents are worried about these horrible school shootings, but they're also worried about tragedies if there's an incident between a young man and a police officer. And the answer to that is a national strategy, again, that says the federal government will support, encourage, fund all police forces to retrain in a different approach. Because you can de-escalate conflict and still keep people safe. We've proven it in New York. Years now, with these new strategies, we're seeing a very different, much better relationship between police and community.
And still kind of keeping with the theme of race, unfortunately, looking at the rising tide of white nationalism, how do you plan to attack that? I mean, we've seen even here in Charleston years ago with the Mother Emanuel shooting. You've heard from other candidates kind of trying to address this. What is your plan to help try and stem this tide?
Gavin, I think it begins with a unifying message and a unifying approach. You know, as I've gone around the country and I've gone around South Carolina, people do not want this division. They do not want that tension and anxiety in our society. I think it begins with literally reversing what President Trump has done. President Trump has sent a message that has encouraged white supremacists. It's encouraged folks who engage in hate speech and even violence. I would send a message of unity, mutual respect. Again, an example from New York. We've made it a point to tell all communities they matter and they're included. People pick up on that and they hear that. I think some real healing can happen in this country, but it really comes down to calling out, people's better angels and showing that this can be a country that really works for everyone. Because in the end, we know a lot of this is related to economic anxiety.
And when we're talking about mass shootings, in some situations we're talking about assault weapons, and there's discussion about having a ban for that. We saw former Congressman Beto O'Rourke say we're coming for your AR-15s. Is that the right message that should be being put out there right now?
No, I don't think so. I think the right message is to have an assault weapons ban. I agree with having the buyback, but to make clear to people at the same time, look, the Second Amendment is part of our Constitution. I understand why a lot of gun owners feel it's a very important right for them. I think at the same time, gun owners and a vast majority of American people want to see better background checks and waiting periods for purchase, and don't want to see assault rifles out there in the general population. So I think part of how you move the country is, meet that majority where it is. Yes to a ban, yes to buybacks, but we should not give people a sense it's going to be punitive or invasive.
Thank you very much, Mayor de Blasio.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Pleasure,
it.
Gavin.
Not all the candidates were able to sit down with us. Out at the stump, the Wilson High School marching band helped Joe Biden make a splash as he took the stage, as he had previously before in 2006, giving him the ability to say something the other candidates couldn't.
It's good to be back. Fritz was South Carolina through and through, and he always made it a point to come to this great event and encouraged me to do it, and I did it very early on. And to the Holiday family, I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you, because they have kept this tradition, which should never die. We also have to acknowledge that there can be no realization of the American dream without continuing to grapple with the original sin of slavery brought to these shores over 400 years ago. A century-long campaign of violence, 4 centuries worth, that in fact fear and trauma brought upon black people in this country. Domestic terrorism and white supremacy have been the antagonist of our highest ideals from our very beginning. Lynch mobs, arsonists, bomb makers, lone gunmen. And we all now realize that violence does not live in the past. If you give it oxygen, it comes back. The same poisonous ideology that lit the fuse in the 16th Street pulled the trigger at Mother Emanuel. A president's words matter. They matter. They can move markets. They can send our brave women and men to war. They can bring peace. They can appeal to the better angels of our nature. But they can also unleash the deepest, darkest forces in this nation. When he said after Charlottesville, the President Trump said, and that's what he's done, unleash those darkest forces. When he said after Charlottesville, there were, quote, very fine people on both sides, he gave license and safe harbor to hate, to white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the KKK. And in doing so, he assigned a moral equivalence between those spewing hate and those with the courage, like all of you, to stand against it. We have to let the American people know. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Everybody, even the people who support him. But here's the deal. We got to let them know who we are. Who we are. We stand for hope over fear. We stand for unity over division. We stand for truth over lies. And we stand for science over fiction. Look, folks, we're better prepared than any nation in the world to lead the world. We have the largest economy. Our workers are 3 times as productive as workers in Asia. There are more great research universities in this state and in America than all the rest of the world combined. We have the greatest scientists in the world. Why in God's name don't we pick our heads up and remember who this is? The United States of America. There's not a single thing we can't do. I mean it. So let's get up, take it back, and lead the world again. God bless you all, and thanks for letting me come back to the stump. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg opened by reminding people his first time in South Carolina was years ago when he was in the Navy and underwent Army training at Fort Jackson in Columbia.
In other words, the first time I came here, it was in order to prepare to serve. And now I'm here once again, prepared to serve and asking for your help in making that happen. Friends, I'm running for president because I believe that our country is running out of time. Our country's in a crisis. The American people are divided, discouraged, and doubtful at the very moment we need to be rising to meet some of the toughest challenges we've ever known. And every day we got a president tweeting out a new outrage in order to distract us from the fact that he's not capable of doing the job. Within a decade, we're going to reach a point of no return on our climate. And yet the president thinks you can change the weather by taking out a Sharpie and rewriting a map. Our economy is so out of whack that the stock market and the gross domestic product are going up at the same time that life expectancy is going down in this country. That shouldn't even be possible. And yet, when we first got news that we might have a recession coming, we spent the whole week talking about whether we were going to keep upsetting Denmark over a proposal to buy Greenland. We ought to be more worried about how to buy groceries at a time like this. You've got a chance to be part of an American majority that will come together to deal with our challenges. Not just die-hard Democrats, but people coming across the aisle. I see one right there. Independents. People who were under no illusions about this president, but may have voted just to do anything for a change. Now we got to actually make sure the change is in the American interest. And that's not going to happen if we act like Donald Trump is just an aberration that just happened out of the blue. It's not going to happen if we try too hard to play it safe or pretend that we can go back to normal. It's also not going to happen if we water down our values or paper over our differences so you got to squint hard just to tell the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. Nor will it happen if we get so trapped in the purity tests that we turn off half the country before we even get to next November. This is a time to unify the American people. This is a time for ideas that are bold enough to get the job done and capable of bringing us together. And if you think about it, that's how Democrats win. From John F. Kennedy to Jimmy Carter to Bill Clinton to Barack Obama, we win when we offer leadership from a new generation with new ideas, calling America to be better than it's been. So here at an event that traces its roots to just a little while after the Civil War, we got to remember that some of our dark moments sometimes bring out the best in us. What is good in America? Dare I say, what is great in America? And I can't wait to tell our future children what we did now to give them a better world. To tell them we set up an economy where we protect workers as well as jobs and see to it that a rising tide really does lift all boats, starting in 2020. Running for office is an act of hope. And so is helping somebody run for office. Not naive hope. It is the hope of those who cannot afford to go back. It is the hope of those who insist on something better than trying to be great again, because there is no again in the real world. It is the hope of those who realize that the future is where we are going to spend every minute of the rest of our lives, so we had better make sure that it is better than the present.
Senator Amy Klobuchar is a third-term senator from Minnesota, and she typically visits South Carolina when a big multi-candidate event is happening. Her stump speech featured her classic humor, a few stories, and her moderate stances.
And there's a funny Minnesota-South Carolina connection, and that is that my mentor, Paul Wellstone, who sadly died in a plane crash, he used to tell the story of his very first speech on the Senate floor. He was so proud of himself, and Senator Hollings comes over and approaches him. He was there. And Senator Hollings, in his inimitable way, says to Paul Wellstone, "Young man, you remind me of Hubert Humphrey." Paul is overjoyed. He's so honored, and he says, "Oh, Senator Hollings, thank you so much." And Hollings says, "Let me finish, young man. You talk too much." You have a former governor who hiked the Appalachian Trail. We don't have a governor that hiked that trail. Oh, that's right, you don't either. We have a president who literally said there were two sides after Charlottesville. Well, there are not two sides when one side is the Ku Klux Klan. There is only one side, and that is the American side. We have a president that has let all these tax cuts go to the wealthy, right? Think of what he's done, how he's built up this debt. Make that argument to your friends, independent, moderate Republican friends, that he has added to the debt daily, that he gave us a tax bill that those Republicans voted for that added $1 trillion to the debt. So you ask what party has been fiscally responsible when you look back through time, when you look at President Clinton and President Obama, it is not the Republican Party, and it is not Donald Trump. He is literally right now treating our farmers, and we are in a big rural community here, treating our farmers and treating our workers like they are poker chips in one of his bankrupt casinos. And if we're not careful, he is going to bankrupt the country. And one thing that I think we need to emphasize more, and we haven't even been asked a question about rural issues in a big way in the debate, I think we have to be the party this time of rural America. You know why? It is the Democratic Party that is worried about your rural hospitals that are closing in South Carolina, right? It is the Democratic Party that is standing up for education. It is the Democratic Party that's standing up for no lead in your water. And yes, it is the Democratic Party that's standing up when it comes to climate change. That's what we need to do. You go to the spring where after that tragedy in Parkland, people joined with the people of Charleston. They joined with the people all over this country. And those kids, they stood up there in Florida. They became icons. And kids all across the country talked to their dads and their grandpas and said, we love hunting too in our family, but we can have universal background checks. We could do something about magazine limits. And those kids didn't just talk. They marched, and then they voted in record levels in the midterm. And then comes a midterm with the election of Joe Cunningham when we make the House of Representatives the people's house again. That is the march that we are on. That is the march that's going to lead us right into November of 2020. And South Carolina Democrats, I want to lead this march because I know how important it is to win in states like yours, because I have the track record to do it, and because you, at my side, are the people that have made this arc of justice even shorter. You are the welders that got us through this. Let's go ahead, let's win this race, and let's send Donald Trump back to where he came from. Thank you, South Carolina.
The Galivants Ferry Stump crowd skewed older and whiter, but the people had a variety of perspectives on the large Democratic field and how they see a path to the White House for Democrats in 2020.
I believe the Democratic Party needs to nominate a centralist to get Republicans like myself and military men and police officers to vote for a Democrat, which is not the best option we had the last time. And that's what happened, is we had Donald Trump as our president. So I really believe that if we elect a centralist, if not me, because I'm a Republican, but if the Democratic Party elects a centralist as their nominee, I think we have a best chance to beat Donald Trump in the election. Is this Mayor Pete will set policies in effect that he's going to be around to live to see what happens. No disrespect to Joe Biden, our vice president, but he's not going to be around to see what happens when he puts something in effect. I want a president that's going to be around for the next 30 years to say, okay, this worked, or, oh, didn't work. Now, out of most of the nominees, he's pretty much the one that's going to be there.
I consider myself a moderate Democrat. You know, I want to show flexibility. And yes, I do think some of the other candidates for me are just a little too far left for me. Yes. Oh, with Joe, I think his plans make a little bit more sense to me. I'm not thoroughly convinced that taxing the rich is the way to go. To me, I look at that like saying, oh, I'm going to build this great big house, and I'm going to build it now with the hope that I'm going to get a raise in 2 years, you know, and that's just the way I look at it. I think doing away with private insurance, I think people should have an option, and my age group of people, we want those options. Yes.
I just think it's time for a change because I'm just afraid if things continue the way they are in the White House, we really are going to be in much more trouble than we're already in.
I've always been a fan of Joe Biden, and I think he's got a lot of experience and he has a wonderful heart. But if we want Donald Trump out of the White House, it's up to us. It's not up to a particular candidate. It's up to us to get out and vote and get our neighbors to get out and vote.
This is the first time I've been really involved with something like this, so I'm planning on keeping an open mind right now.
I think Amy and Pete were all great.
Yes.
You know, I liked everything that they had to say.
For more videos from this year's Stump, check out youtube.com/South Carolina ETV, and you can watch the entire video from the Stump as well as on scetv.org. Also, check out the South Carolina Lead. It's a political podcast that I host each week with the reporters who cover the stories affecting you. You can find that on any mobile device. From Galivants Ferry, I'm Gavin Jackson.